And to the 12th meeting of the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking Advisory Committee. I can't believe we are at meeting number 12 already. It's been a great long process. So thanks for continuing with it over this last year and a half. So to get started today, I'll review our agenda in just a moment here, but I'll turn it over to Commissioner Lilac to give us some opening remarks before we dive in.
Thank you, Sylvia, and good morning. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully everybody's travels were safe this morning, as we have snow late in the season, and it's made travel treacherous in a lot of places. So hopefully everybody's in a good space now. As Sylvia mentioned, our 12th meeting, and we were initially planning for fewer than that. And thanks to staff for having the foresight to schedule this meeting several months ago, so that we could check in between our two commission hearing dates in late March and scheduled for May 19th at this point. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to our 12th meeting. Thank you very much. Today's RAC meeting is going to be different from the others in the sense that today we're going to be seeking your input, seeking everybody's input on 4 key policy areas that we discussed at the commission meeting last month. And I know staff is going to be engaging the RAC and many others. And I think Cody's going to talk about some of those other avenues to provide input over the course of this month. I just want to, I can't pass up the opportunity to thank you for continuing to participate, continuing to provide comments, suggestions, recommendations, both policy level, big picture, and specific recommendations. They're incredibly helpful. We're all spending time reviewing those, thinking through those, trying to balance them as we have a lot of perspectives from a lot of different people and organizations as we continue through this process. The final piece is we're going to talk about these 4 key issues today. We certainly do not expect to achieve agreement or consensus or anything of that nature on those. I mean, if we do, great, but that's not the goal today. Today, the real goal is to listen to all the perspectives on the various approaches for how we as a commission might tackle and address some of these key issues that we're going to be discussing today. So with that, I just want to welcome everybody again. I appreciate your being here and your commitment throughout the entire process. So with that, Sylvia, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Commissioner. Okay, well, I'll dive into our agenda for today. And so hopefully you all received the meeting packet on Friday that had the agenda and a few additional pieces. And we know that was a later meeting packet than usual, but like Commissioner Lilac said, this is really a special kind of meeting that's really a check-in between the 2 commission hearing dates in March and May. And so staff didn't have a lot of time to pull together a packet after the recent commission meeting in time for today's meeting, but we'll have time to kind of go through everything if you didn't have a chance to review the packet in depth from last Friday. So today, like Commissioner Lilac said, we're really focusing on 4 key pieces that came out of the March commission meeting. So 4 issues. So we're going to be talking about timing of implementation of the rules over the next few years and kind of optional work program for local governments to provide some flexibility that's been requested. We're also going to talk about inclusion of bicycle network standards. So these are the acronym that I keep forgetting. It's the National Association of City Transportation Officials bicycle standards that have been requested to kind of be included in the rules and how that might be referred to in the rules. And then we're also going to talk about affordable housing and anti-displacement. So there was direction from the commission to include a requirement for local governments to adopt measures to promote affordable housing and to prevent displacement in climate-friendly areas. And then also looking at large site block length. So again, direction from the commission to develop an alternative block length standard in climate-friendly areas. And so for each of these, the format of today's meeting is really going to be DLCD providing a proposed path forward to respond to these 4 issues identified by the commission, and then really asking you, what are your thoughts? You know, does this sound like a good proposal, path forward, or do you have anything else you want staff to be considering as it makes these changes in advance of the May commission meeting? So I'll stop sharing the screen, and just a few kind of process reminders. So today we'll be really having our entire meeting in the large room. We won't be doing any breakout rooms, but we do encourage you to use the chat for any troubleshooting or issues and really just bring any thoughts you have into the conversation today. And as you noted, the meeting's being recorded and there will be a recording posted online, and we'll put that link in the chat too. And members of the public that are listening in, you are always welcome to submit written comments to the project email, which is dlcd.cfec@state.or.us, and all that information is on the website. And when we get to our discussion periods today, we'll just ask you to raise your hand to get in the queue, or if you're by phone only, press *9. You are all experts at raising your hand by now. And with that, I will hand it over to Cody for a few updates from DLCD.
Thank you, Sylvia. Good morning, everyone. Cody Meyer, planner here with DLCD, and just want to give a couple quick updates on what's been happening lately, and check in on the process and some of the implementation packages that we're putting together. So the first public hearing we've held, that was back in a couple weeks ago, March 31st. We had a really long session with the commission and got the direction we received to re-engage you all about these key issues today. And then we will be holding, or they will be holding, their final adoption hearing, which is scheduled for May 19th. And we are anticipating having everything ready to go after we talk with you and work together on some key issues, and a lot of just kind of sanding off the rough edges of some of the rules to make sure that everything's cross-checked and tabbed, and some of the things that the final polishing of the furniture here is the analogy we're using. So then it takes a couple months, but the effective date we're hoping to be about June 22nd. So it's an approximate date, but that's when the rules should be going into effect if they are adopted. And then just a sneak peek on implementation on the ground. We will be working in Eugene, Springfield, and Salem Kaiser on their regional plans to meet the greenhouse gas targets. Will be upcoming work, putting together work programs for that, which will include kind of an overview of when their TSPs will be updated consistent with that. We are DLCD staff putting together the contracts for the climate-friendly area designation study, mapping and community engagement plans. So it's the first phase, which is required. And we've been working with the affected jurisdictions with some funding we have now to put those contracts together. So the state will be ready when the jurisdictions are ready to begin work. So we're hoping to have everything kind of ready to go in early June. And then it's up to those jurisdictions when they want to start that work. Parking reform, there's two phases there, but we are anticipating some parking reform happening early on in the process here. And then the setting performance measures and targets for reaching the greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. So those are the kind of things that we're hoping to get out of the gate very quickly here. Process-wise, we put this together to kind of give a picture of what this whole thing has looked like over 2 years. So we had our marching orders from the governor back in March of 2020, 2 years ago. And we really spent about 6 months scoping and interviewing people and getting a real tight charge from the commission to make sure we had sideboards for the work. We did a lot of engagement throughout that process. Of course, you all know you're part of this rulemaking phase 1 and 2, but just to put it here that we've been meeting with you, we've been meeting with communities around the state through our regional practitioner meetings and our regional public workshops. All in all, I think we tallied it up and we have over 140 public facing meetings that we've held as staff over the last 2 years to do this work, and we're not done yet. So coming up today at 2 o'clock, we're going to have a question and answer sessions that we've been holding, and we anticipate holding more of those going on into the future, and certainly during implementation. We think that it's going to be important to have staff available for folks to come and ask questions and get interpretations from the folks who wrote the rules on how to implement those. Another one I wanted to highlight for you all is the Community Needs Forum. So we're holding that this Thursday, 3 to 5, and that's open to anyone. And so we really hope that you can help get the word out there. The purpose of that is to really look at what are the needs from community benefit organizations, your kind of non-governmental entities, to meaningfully participate in the rules as they get implemented. So we want to understand what are the needs of our local government partners. We'll be sending out a survey to them this week that's kind of asking on seeking and timing and just getting an idea for what our budget request should look like. But we also want to understand that we have a lot of equitable engagement in the rules. And so we want to hear from the people who need to participate on what they need. So we hope that you do spread that word out. And if I will chat the link when I'm wrapping up here. Then finally, we had interviewed our community benefit organization partners on the RAC. So Kearns and West, DLCD met with them. And we really appreciate that input and for folks taking the extra time there. So we want to make sure that we're circling back with you all, and we anticipate kind of summarizing that and sending it out to the RAC for your information. And DLCD is going to use that to help course correct and get our process better for the next RAC that we do. Yeah, so we have a draft implementation work plan. I'll chat that at you also if you want to take a look at the funding to support the program and how we're kind of lining things up. I think that's it. So if there's any questions, I can wrap up or we can get into the meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Is there any questions on any of the timeline pieces or engagement there? Okay, great. Thank you, Cody. Well, with that, I think we will head on over to Bill Holmstrom to get into our first topic, which is the work program and other options for timing. And again, I think we'll have Bill work through a presentation and then just really hear your thoughts and reflections on the proposal moving forward and maybe a few additional kind of focused questions on this piece. So Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you everybody for joining us again today. Appreciate you taking your time to meet with us. I just have a few slides on this and really just following along kind of with that two-page memo that we sent you on Friday. So, work program. This is mostly going to be about the work program itself. You know, we put together the work program kind of near the end of the rule process, you know, after hearing quite a bit about the timelines and talking with local governments in particular about different things that are happening in different places. You got different plans that are, you know, need to be updated in different timelines. Some people have very new transportation system plans. Some people need to update them relatively soon. With the, you know, understanding of the resources that are going to be available and the fact that we can't spend it all at once, it has to kind of be spent over time just because of the resources available, both just the staff available at the state to deploy those resources, as well as, you know, a lot of that money is going to go to fund consultants, and there's only so many consultants in Oregon to do this work. And so kind of all those kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Bottlenecks, you know, along the way that we need to be cognizant of. We want to make sure that we're letting local governments sequence things logically, provide some additional flexibility. You know, we want things to happen urgently. That was part of what the governor told us to do as part of the charge of the rulemaking. But if we're setting unreasonable expectations, it's not going to happen at all, and that's not what we want. We want things to happen. So that was why we put the work program out there. I think staff's intention, by staff I mean me, I guess, wrote it, was this is supposed to be a pretty low effort work product in terms of putting the work program itself together, that we want people to spend their time on those substantive work program products, the elements that you're putting in that work program, and not so much the work program itself. So just understanding that mindset going forward, I think will help explain some of these questions that we're going to talk about. And you know, yeah, let's go ahead and just jump into the questions if that's all right. So we had 5 kind of key, I think, questions that came out of our discussion with the commission and just, you know, working with these work programs. You know, in general, we want to make sure that, you know, it's clear that, what happens when, who has to do what when, and that the level of effort that's expected is clear as well. So just as an overall, but so the first bit is kind of about, we have a requirement in the work program that local governments coordinate across the metropolitan area, all the other jurisdictions in the region, to submit a work program. We've heard quite a bit that that may be a level of friction there that causes our low effort work program to be not so low effort. And so I think the question is, there's a balance between making sure that we have work programs that make sense across the region, that we have jurisdictions that aren't working at cross purposes with each other, that where there's opportunities to do work in conjunction across the region, or that's required to happen across the region, that everyone knows when it's happening and it's all happening at the same time on everybody's work programs. So that's why we have that requirement. But in addition to that requirement, we also have a set of review criteria for the work program, for when the department is reviewing that work program and considering whether or not to recommend it to the commission. And that's also in there. So I think, staff's thought is we could drop that first requirement to say, hey, you have to have a coordinated work program. But when, we don't have that requirement, but instead, when we're reviewing your work program, you need to be clear that it is coordinated and that, you've thought about that at least. You don't necessarily have to be attached to those other jurisdictions in terms of having a work program, but at least you need to have thought about it in your work program. So I think that's our first question. I don't know, Sylvia, how you want to handle this, if you want to kind of ask people step by step.
Yeah, I think maybe let's go through all the questions,
Okay.
And then I can drop them in the chat and we can see which ones kind of hit home for folks and they want to focus on, if that works.
That's great. That's fine with me. A lot of Bill talking, but that's all right. So our second question is about the due date, and I actually am looking at this now. I wrote the wrong. Oh no, that's the right date. I'm sorry. That December 2022 is when we the rule requires local governments to have submitted the work program. That's the end of this year. So by the time the rule is adopted, it gives about 6 months, 5-6 months to put a work program together and submit it to us, to the department, and then we'll have the commission review that. And we've heard, I think, both directions on this, that is giving people a long time, and we've heard also that that's not enough time. And I think our question is, assuming that this is a relatively low effort work product, potentially not having to go through a regional process, is that still the right time frame? Should we move it one direction or the other? That's the question. If I can get my right, there we go. Okay, so this question is about the work program, the content of the work program. There are 4 elements that the rule says are required as part of the work program. You have to tell us what work is underway right now to start to meet those requirements, and that's a short narrative is what we would expect there. 2 things, both dates that would continue to apply, excuse me, kind of, oops, there we go, apply. So the dates that are in this rules that you continue to use, and then any proposed dates for other pieces of the rule that you'd want to change. There are a certain number of different things that can be part of that work program, and you tell us which ones you want to change, which ones you want to keep the same. Maybe you want to change all of them, that's fine. So that's it. There's just the dates and that, and then the schedule for when you expect to update your local transportation system plan. So that's it. That's what the work program is. It's not any more than that. And I think we've heard in comments that that people are concerned that there's a level of content that is it might have been too much, and it's not clear to me what else we could take out of that, or if people were maybe thinking that there were other things that would be part of that work program that aren't in the rules. So I just want to be clear about what we expect. Like, again, relatively low effort products. And so the question is this the right level of content, or there's other things that we should be including? or is there something in here that we shouldn't include? I think these are pretty pretty standard and basic stuff. So I don't know that we need, but we can have that discussion. That's fine. All right. So the work program expected to be completed by 2027. That's the date currently in the draft rules. That's moved around a little bit over time, but in general, we've been, the trend is to provide more time. The more we've heard from local governments in particular is that, you know, it's going to be difficult to get everything done that we're expecting to have done by certain time frames. So that's the present date in the schedule. Again, you know, we've heard both directions on this, that it's 5 years from now. That's not fast enough, that we need to move quicker. We've also heard that's maybe not a reasonable amount of time to get everything done that we're asking. So, you know, just to be clear, that the 2027 date's later than an individual timeline right now. We are going to be revisiting as part of our technical review all of the different timelines in the rule, just to make sure that they're clear, consistent, and reasonable. But right now, I just think we want to get a sense of where the advisory committee is at on the 2027 date for completing the work within the work program. Is that a reasonable date? And then our last question, and this comes out of our commission meeting, where I think we had some commissioners that were interested in asking some questions about engagement. And, you know, this is the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. We want to make sure that we're touching on climate and equity, and that we're talking with people, in particular underserved communities, about every step of the way. Right now, the draft rules don't say, you know, that there needs to be any particular engagement that a local government needs to do with anybody in putting together the work program. You know, actually, it only says you just have to talk with the other jurisdictions in your area, like I said before. And, you know, to be clear, we're requiring a substantial amount of public engagement in those substantive elements that are going to be part of the work program. But in terms of developing the work program itself, like we said, we expected it to be a kind of a short, small, low effort product. But, you know, when the dates certain things happen, can reasonably be thought of as things that maybe people would like to be engaged with and that have impacts in the community. So I think the question here is, should we require some level of engagement for the work program? Understanding that if we were to do that, that would have impacts in it would be a higher effort work program. You know, our question about December 2022 becomes a little bit different then. Can we get it done by that point? Do we need more time? I think there's some trade-offs there. So I think that's just something that we're interested in. I frankly don't have an opinion on this one way or the other. I'm interested to hear what the advisory committee has to say, because this may be one place where we want to spend some more time and make sure that we have community engagement. Or maybe it's one of these things that's just, no, let's get it out of the way and get going on the substantive issues. So Sylvia, I guess I'll hand it back to you, and we can step through these. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. And that was, you know, a number of questions here, but they're all related to each other and all important pieces that the commission is asking DLCD to focus on. So we dropped those kind of discussion questions in the chat here, and just thinking about the best approach to this discussion. I mean, it does seem like that engagement piece at the end is a critical question for the other pieces, right? Like, should engagement be required to develop the work program itself? That, of course, impacts the timeline and possibly even the content for the work program. So maybe we can start there. If folks have any thoughts on whether the rules should require engagement for developing the work program itself. I think Bill laid out that, you know, later on there's required engagement, but currently the rules don't require engagement for developing the work program itself. So any thoughts on that one? And maybe, you know, also clarifying questions, we can start with that if something didn't make sense. Rob, yeah, I see your hand up.
Good morning. Yeah, so I think the challenge is some of these things are kind of connected to each other. So if we're going to keep the December date, we feel like public engagement should not be required because that could take some time. if you want to require public engagement, then I think it would probably be a good idea to push that date back.
Okay, that's helpful, Rob. And Leanne? And just a reminder, I know this is our final RAC meeting, but for members of the public, especially listening, if you just introduce yourself, especially the first time you speak, let people know who you are. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Liana Yoshi and they pronouns with Ben Bikes and a RAC member. I just wanted to clarify, because I think this would help me determine whether or not I would think there would need to be public engagement. Is was staff directed to actually set some TSP deadlines? Because that's the piece I think that the public may have some input on, would be that's the schedule for the TSP updates. Now, if there's going to be some kind of catch-all that says like, hey, TSP updates have to happen within X amount of time, I feel like some folks may feel like they're able to let go of public engagement at this point. But if it's going to be broader, then there may be some opportunity for public input as far as TSP updates. I'm thinking in particular because Bend had a very recent TSP update and understanding what that looks like for our community. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for my unmute button. Yeah, right now, the way the draft rule is written is if the jurisdiction chooses to do a work program, and let's remember this is an optional work program for every jurisdiction, except those in the Eugene, Springfield, and Salem-Keizer areas, which would do it as part of their work program. That's a joint work program with the Division 44 requirements having to do with scenario planning. But everyone else, it's an option. You don't even have to do it if you don't want to. That they would, if they choose to do a work program, which we expect people to do, that they would set out the dates for when the TSP update would happen as part of that work program. Yes.
Did that answer the question, Leanne, or jog anything for you?
So the short answer is that there is not a outer boundary of when TSPs have to be updated, like a 3-year deadline, 2-year deadline, that type of thing. I know there was some dialogue around that. I just want to make sure that
there's not presently a hard date in the rules for when transportation system plans need to be updated. That's correct.
Thank you.
And Kirsten, just checking if you have a response to this question, because
I don't. but I would like to invite Bill to say a little bit more about that, because he has counseled me on the state of TSPs in Oregon. I mean, his background, so that Bill gets a break, maybe sip some water or something. But we know that the state of comprehensive plan elements, then notwithstanding being very recent, and others are too, can generally, whether it's housing, transportation, actually housing, economic development, parks and recreation, goal 5 resources, elements of comprehensive plans can be very dated, since we haven't had really adequate funding for periodic review of comprehensive plans as originally envisioned by the program. But Bill's counseled me about the state of TSP elements in general. And Bill, I just wonder if you could say a little bit to the group and to help just refresh us all, including commission liaisons, your thinking and staff's thinking about why we haven't set, as Leanne mentioned, we have had considerable discussion on this. Should we have a hard deadline for all TSPs or TSPs in the region? Bill, I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. So, like Kirsten mentioned, many pieces of local comprehensive plans are out of date. I mean, it's not unusual to see comprehensive plans that haven't been have sections that have been updated since acknowledgement back in the 80s or so. So, in general, though, transportation system plans tend to be more frequently updated than other parts of the plan, because there's funding available from ODOT through the Transportation Growth Management Program, as well as through other funding sources through what they call SPR, State Planning and Research funds that come through the ODOT regions. And then, also plans get updated through local funding and other funding sources as well. There just tends to be a lot more money out there to update those parts of the plans than there are for other parts of the plans, unfortunately, because all the other parts need attention as well. So it's not to say that it's 100% of jurisdictions are completely up to date with their TSPs, but in general, we find that they are. The other piece of it, particularly in metropolitan areas, is that there's federal planning processes that are continually underway that update the federal regional transportation plan every 4 to 5 years. Those regional transportation plans need to find projects somewhere, to fund and to put in those plans. And in Oregon, a plan has to be in the local comprehensive plan in order to be something that can be constructed or funded. And so TSPs tend to get updated because there's demand for additional transportation projects to be put on those plans. And so they do tend to get updated more often than other parts of the comprehensive plan.
All right, thank you, Bill. Let's see, Matt, let's go to you and then Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Matt Brinkley, City of Medford. I think if you want to have meaningful public input on the work program, I agree with Rob, it would have to be pushed back. I mean, if you want us to throw together some open houses or something like that and pretend that we've done public outreach, we can probably achieve that in the timeline, but my guess is that that is not the intent of having public outreach and, for developing the work plan. And then I guess I'm not sure how much value there would be in public outreach for the work plan. So, and then I have a question, I guess, for Bill, just to clarify things. So if we do a work plan, the rule right now says that the work in the work plan would have to be completed by 2027. Am I right about that? And if that's true, updating the TSP is one of those things that we would have to do. So effectively, doesn't the rule say that we would have to update TSPs by 2027 if we do a work plan?
I think the way we've written it, and we will, one of the things that we're going to be doing is going through the rule and making sure that things are clearer. And this is one piece I think where we will need to clarify, is that the pieces that need to be done by 2027 are those elements of the work program where you've adjusted dates for things that are required in the rules, and that the piece about the transportation system plan could happen independent of that 2027 deadline. I think, our expectation, it's going to be a part of the work program, though, that would need to be reviewed and approved by the commission. So I think if a date were unreasonably far out for that TSP update, I think the commission would have some concerns about that. So I think that's the trade-off there.
Thanks, Matt. And Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Emma Newman with the City of Springfield, a RAC member. I guess when I think about all of these questions and the rules overall, I think it's important to focus on the outcomes and making sure that we're achieving the climate and equitable goals of this whole process. And so I think it's less interesting to focus on the how, and there should be more flexibility for local jurisdictions to get to the desired outcomes. Specifically for question 5 around community engagement or not in the work program development, I'm seeking some more clarity on what the work program is expected to be. At the commission hearing, I was hearing that it's just dates, and that's not what I'm understanding from the review factors in the work plan. So section 12, the effective dates, subsection 3F are the factors that the commission would, or DLCD and the commission would use to evaluate and approve the work program. And to use those factors, it seems like there needs to be more than just dates in the work program. But if it is purely just dates, then what is the intended benefit or input of engaging community members if we're just talking about dates between here and 2027? So it really depends on what are we talking about? So could you help clarify what is in the work program in order to achieve the review factors, and also how does that relate to this question specifically?
Yeah. So thank you for that. I think that goes back to one of the other questions. I mean, these are all connected questions. They don't stand alone. About the content of the work program, what's the right content of the work program? We've heard, different, I think, opinions or about what people think should, or what they think the rule says about the work program. And in my mind, it was always relatively simple. Is, you know, I want to say reduced to just dates, but it, you know, pretty much dates and, you know, what, you know, kind of a short narrative about what's happening now and when you expect to do a TSP update. So, but, you know, if you're going to be doing a engagement program, first of all, we understand that's going to take more time. So we've heard a couple comments on that. I think that's part of the trade-off, right? That we're, you know, asking the advisory committee to give us some feedback on. And then in terms of the, you know, that's a good question about, you know, how will the commission or the department reasonably review, you know, a set of dates against the review criteria in the rule? Good question. I'm not sure. You know, maybe we need to think through our criteria. Although, you know, they're very broad criteria. You know, I'll just read them off here real quick. It doesn't take very long. The director will review the proposed work program and make a recommendation to the commission as to whether the proposed work program meets the following criteria: achieves equitable outcomes, ensures urgent action, coordinates across jurisdictions within the metropolitan area, coordinates with work required as provided in essentially Division 44, makes it a specific reference there. It sequences elements of the work program into a logical progression and considers availability of funding and other resources to complete the work. I think those last four are pretty straightforward. You know, you could take a series of dates and review them across those four. But those first two maybe are where I think maybe the question is, how do you know if that set of date achieves equitable outcomes and ensures urgent action? Well, I guess the urgent action is if those dates are all really close, you know, close and, you know, soon. But is that what you're asking, Emma? Is mostly that first one, I think, is kind of the key one.
I'd say that the different factors all matter. I mean, I think about availability of funding and other resources to complete the work. And if you are handed a piece of paper with January 30th, December 30th, how does that relate to funding and available resources? Like, I'm not seeing how the information to evaluate based on these factors would be provided if it's purely just dates.
So I think this is how I see the next 6 months or so going, okay? Is that local jurisdictions are going to say, we've got all this stuff to do, when are we going to be able to do it? And we're going to be sitting down with ODOT, like Cody said, we've already been working on this. And there's an implementation kind of strategy that was part of the commission's packet. I think he we'll put a link, or did put a link in the chat to that document. We're going to sit down with local jurisdictions over the next 6 months and say, this is what we expect will be available, when it'll be available, and when we're going to be able to work in individual jurisdictions. And that will be part of making the decisions within your work program. You know, I don't expect, I mean, you know, the rules are written this way. I guess you could do it, but I don't expect jurisdictions just to send in a work program sight unseen by DLCD staff ahead of time. I think this is a cooperative process where we'd work with jurisdictions to say, this is how we expect things to work. When is your TSP? How old is it? When does it need to be updated? What else is going on? Other programs that are happening? You know, and you know, what's happening at the local jurisdiction in terms of other work, and we want to work with you. This is about providing flexibility within the strictures of the rules, which, you know, ask us to make very specific, you know, requirements. So it's as much about flexibility for local governments as it is, I think, for the state agencies who are going to be providing the resources to do the work. We're trying to cut all of us a little bit of slack here. That's the idea. So if you think about it as not so much, we're going to hand you this thing at the end, you know, in December, and we're going to see it and not know what's happening. I think it's going to be a process of sitting down, working through local jurisdictions. I don't know, Cody, if you have anything to add to that. Hopefully he agrees. Okay, good.
I just have a couple follow-up comments given that additional explanation. Thank you. I think for question one, if it is going to be required to be regionally coordinated, then more time definitely would be needed to do that. That could involve setting up intergovernmental agreements between different jurisdictions to kind of get the framework and foundation built solidly so that we can be faster with implementation. I think that so much of this, question four, you know, depends on the funding and the resources available. And I personally would recommend that DLCD staff spend more time ensuring that the rest of the community engagement language in the rules is clear, is not conflicting, and is not so prescriptive that it leaves very little room for local jurisdictions to take into account the feedback that we're receiving throughout the process. I'd rather spend less time and complexity in setting things up and get to the doing sooner and make sure that the rule adoption has the outcome of clear and clarified, not conflicting rules, because doing that work here between now and adoption, that's going to make everything more efficient later. And that's going to benefit actually getting to the desired outcomes that this rulemaking is oriented toward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Emma. Okay, so let's go. And Kirsten, I saw your hand up and down, so I just want to see if you had a thought on that particular comment.
It is. I just wanted to yield there while Emma was following up. But Bill, do you know, we wish that we could provide sample everything right now to go with the packet. As folks can see, it's sort of, we are co-creating this together with local governments and community-based organizations and you all on the RAC. So wish we could eat it all at once, but it just doesn't seem to be possible. Bill, do you have a kind of a thought in your mind about the length of the work program? I know that's arbitrary, but I've heard some lengths thrown around. But then the first question is, I think more that you read, Bill, from the rule is more, how would you expect the equitable outcomes to be achieved by implementation of your work program? Not how will it be achieved? Do you know what I mean? So there's a little nuance that we might consider, but how long do you think that these documents would be? 40 pages, 4 pages, 2 pages, 6 pages? What are you expecting to receive here after working on it with local governments? Because we're just really cognizant of staff challenges, magnitude of other rule, implementation, housing included, just other, local government's capacity. So how long are you thinking of this, Bill?
Well, never having written or seen one, because they don't exist yet, I'd say in the 2-page range is probably about what I had in mind. Yeah. 2 to 4 at most.
Less than 10, less than 10, less than 10, 6. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a helpful visual for what this could look like. Okay, so let's see. I see a number of hands up, and I just also want to know, we know that especially for thinking about engagement and equitable engagement, it would be really helpful to hear from community-based organizations or on any of these other questions related to timeline or content in the work program. So encourage folks to raise your hand if you have thoughts on any of this, even if it's to say this is all headed in the right direction, or to express any concerns or recommendations to change any of these. So Julie, let's head over to you.
Hi, Julie Warnicki, City of Salem. And I guess I echo a lot of what Emma said. I don't really see a value in community engagement on the work program as is being described, because I think that there would be a lot of, you couldn't just do a 2-page thing to do. We would need to bring the community along into understanding the complexities of the rule and what is being expected in order to set that up and get meaningful input. I do question the commission's, the rule says that the commission is going to hold a public hearing on our work program. And so I sort of question the reasoning for that, the benefit of that, and how that's create maybe some, I mean, if we're not doing public engagement, but DLCD is doing public engagement, then how does that work?
Yeah, good question. I think, the thought on this was that we did want the commission to have that role of approving the work program. And so as your question about the process that the commission uses to do that, whether or not if they hold a public hearing or not, is that the issue?
Yeah, we're not doing any community engagement on the work program as it's currently envisioned. And then we send it over to DLCD, and LCDC holds a public hearing on it. I don't know, it seems like maybe then we should have had more engagement at the local level if the state is having engagement on it.
Kirsten, did you have thoughts on that? What it could look like?
This is a really tough one. So I just wanted to explain it and express, and, local government, senior staff on the phone today are being very clear about kind of the folks who have spoken already. Really appreciate the clarity of kind of the dependencies around some of these expectations and the timeline and implications. So thank you. On the other side, just for a moment to put it on the table, would be kind of the phrase, I suspect we've all heard it, but nothing about us without us. And in that these rules are meant to, and Julie, this isn't specific to you, but just that these, the rules generally are meant to benefit communities who have been sort of maligned by public planning law and practice for the last 100 years. So it is a significant undertaking. Not that we have to do that in the work program, but what is that right balance? We are honestly searching for what is that right balance of allowing people to comment. So it's not just all back room, like, oh, here we've decided that this is the work plan. This is when we're going to come engage you, instead of like, this is how we expect to work with you on the implementation of the rules in a more collaborative way with community-based and community serving organizations. So and that would be the ideal, right? Would be like, there'd be a little bit of consultation there, not necessarily a whole public process. Everyone that's spoken today has been undertaking significant and sophisticated public processes associated with other public, comp plan amendments underway, be they vision or comp plan amendments directly. So we understand, like, even the thought of wedging another, public engagement process in there is, the added value is potentially quite limited, both on staff time and community bandwidth. But what is, maybe a consultation best practice that, jurisdictions are, checking with community-based organizations, community serving organizations, so that, down the road 2 or 3 years, everyone can program this in. It's not just the local government, it's also the community-based and community serving organizations that are expected to kind of participate and help advise local government. So how to attain more of a collaborative work program without doing a full public process. So looking for kind of a threading the needle there, so to speak, somehow. And I'm not sure I have the right answer now, but I just wanted to kind of put on the table that other perspective of, okay, none is none. And that can be like not the most ideal. A full is out of the question, would knock everybody off track. It's not the intent. Folks, Emma has advised, focus on the outcome, not the process. But how do we sort of kind of try and do things a little bit differently here than we have in the past? The state modeling the actions as well as local, and helping fund and consult and support, as well as local government. So I don't know that I have the answer, and I hope that added some value, and I will try to be less verbose for the rest of the meetings. We really want to hear from you all. Thank you.
So just one thing, I haven't exactly thought this through. The city of Salem, because we are going to be required to do a work program anyway, is a little bit different, but I would assume, say we were just doing the work program voluntarily, I would assume we would have to go to our city council. And so that in and of itself, it's, would not be a hearing, but that is a level of engagement already, and takes time.
Yeah.
And I wondered if it probably wouldn't, have we talked about whether this goes to planning commission as well as, because I think those formal, advisory boards and commission steps, elected and appointed, to say planning commission and council, could be all that's needed at this juncture, without trying to do a separate sort of community-based engagement.
Okay. Thanks, Julie and Kirsten. I know we have just a few minutes left on this topic, but maybe we'll try to get through as many comments as we can, so we have time for the other 3 pieces of today's agenda. So Jonathan, over to you, and then Mary Kyle.
Good morning, Jonathan Harker, pronouns he, him. I've been representing the Oregon American Planning Association. So I guess I want to comment on just this topic of the work program and the timing. When Cody mentioned sideboards, one of the sideboards from the beginning of the process was that we would both take action with a sense of urgency, with rules scheduled to apply as quickly as is reasonable. The question about is 2027 the right date? No, it's too long. I would concur with people who say that it's too long. And in terms of the need to have a transportation system plan deadline, I'm pretty sure I heard the commission say, look at establishing a deadline for the TSP. So I think there should be a conversation about that. And I have some thoughts about that. I haven't seen any value in the achieving flexibility by doing a regional work program or doing a work program at all that has to be approved by LCDC. I think to achieve the flexibility is to allow the jurisdictions to have a deadline, allow them to establish how they're going to meet those deadlines, and give them the flexibility to organize the work tasks, the milestones, the public hearings, all those sort of things that the cities and the counties are going to have to do. And so the recommendations that we've made in the past, that is, we've been OAPA and was in the LCDC packet for the draft hearing, the last hearing was, the first hearing was, like give them, like we suggested, say like give them 2.5 years to start with to do the parking and CFA related work. Then allow them another year to do the TSPs, because you probably want to have the CFAs in place before you do the TSPs. And then allow, during this process, a 1-year extension without having to go through any process, as long as the extension is not applied for any sooner than 2 years after the effective date of the rules. It's all kind of laid out in the testimony we presented. The idea being is what we first did the rules, we just said do dates, and you gave the jurisdictions the opportunity to figure out how to get those dates. You probably don't think those dates are reasonable because the staff has said that they expect everybody to do the option, the work program option, but that just seems to add more complexity. There's no particular reason to be working at this regionally. That just adds complexity. The criteria, for example, achieve equitable outcomes. The work program that you described, it isn't going to tell us whether or not it achieves equitable outcomes. The implementation of the rules is how we're going to get to the achieving equitable outcomes. And so I just think that the process should be focused on, DLCD should be focused on, and ODOT should be focused on providing the resources, as that's one of the things that the executive board has said for DLCD and ODOT to do, is find the resources and to just enable the jurisdictions to do the work that jurisdictions do, which is create a work program, a work plan, critical path analysis, all those sort of things that will engage people in developing that work plan and doing the work, all the public hearings and whatever they're going to have to do. Anyway, so I guess I'll stop there. I concur with a lot of things that Emma said, and I noticed that Eugene actually had sort of a similar sort of thing, like an 18-month blanket extension, kind of dropped the work program stuff. I just don't think it adds any value to have this engagement with DLCD staff over timing and those sort of things, rather than just let the jurisdictions do the work and enable them to do the work. I'll stop there because I know that you have other people to listen to.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that. Mary Kyle?
I'm glad Jonathan went before me because he just said everything I would have said. I assume DLCD staff is going to be working with the local staff throughout all of this, whether we have it in a rule or not. So I agree with everything Jonathan said. And there already is a provision in the proposed rules for the commission to extend any deadline that may be anywhere in these rules. So anyway, thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Rob and then Margie.
Yeah, in terms of the community engagement piece, one thing that's interesting is that I think there's a real need for capacity building for community-based organizations. So one thing I've learned in my work as a transportation planner is when I'm going to engage with more frontline communities, I want to ask them more about like what their needs and their day-to-day issues are. And then I can take that and translate that. I'm not going to bring to them a complex planning program and ask for their input. I don't think that's fair to them. So just thinking about, there's a couple of advocacy organizations I could see in Eugene. I don't know if I call them community-based organizations that, that might be a little more sophisticated. So I just think that's something I think about when you're talking about going to get community engagement on a work plan. So, in terms of like what Jonathan was saying around doing a TSP in a year, there's this tension here between trying to get this work done and then doing the community engagement that we're talking about, especially, in terms of equity. And, it's just like those things can conflict with each other. So, keep that in mind. And I think one of the challenges all along in this process is that, honestly, I don't know that DLCD staff have really mapped out what are all the steps you need to do to update your code in terms of all the public hearings, notification processes, community engagement, et cetera. And then the same thing for like a TSP update. I have one clarifying question. So for the proposed work plan for like Eugene Springfield, just the scenario planning piece is different, but otherwise the way the work plan would work would be the same. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we've
okay.
I think Salem asked us to kind of, hey, you're asking us to do two different work programs. Can't you just have them do it at the same time? And we said yes. So they're going to be together, but you just need to meet the requirements of both those divisions, right?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And just also want to lift up a comment that was sent in the chat, just to make sure that if there is any engagement done, to provide information in languages and make it accessible. So translated into various languages as well as American Sign Language. So thanks for that comment. And Margie, over to you. And then I think we'll end this conversation and move into the next topic.
Thanks. I'll try to keep it short. Yeah, here I'm Margie from the Metro region. I want to just acknowledge and share that when we're scoping our regional transportation plan, which is to be adopted in November of 2023, we do a very formal scoping process in which we just completed. And in that scoping process, we are explicitly asked to acknowledge and integrate the work plan for this effort with our RTP by our local jurisdiction. So we will be doing that. But to go to the question number 2 in the chat, in terms of timing, I think what we would do is hope to kind of have you a draft in terms of the regional work plan by 2022, knowing that it may be an iterative process, likely to be acknowledged in Chapter 8 of our RTP, and then formally adopted in 2023. So hopefully that works for DLCD and LCDC. But thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. And we've provided an opportunity for LCDC to go back and amend work programs anytime along the way as much as they would like to do. So we're trying to provide that flexibility because we know even if a work program gets done by the end of this year, things change, budgets get cut, stuff happens. We need to be able to be nimble enough to understand and to adjust those because of that.
Thank you.
So Sylvia, I think I have just one slide left on timing, just so that folks are aware of kind of what we're doing next. We expect, because I think there's kind of a range of ideas about how urgent we need to make things happen. We're going to provide I think a range of options to the commission, at least a couple different options in terms of what different timelines could look like. And let the commission really get that feedback and make that decision about what are the right trade-offs here, what's the right kind of way to go. So that's our idea right now. We absolutely want to make sure that we go back through the rules, especially around timing, and clarify and simplify to the extent that we can. So I have some ideas for doing that, and we've received, I think, some some good feedback from some of the jurisdictions that I even hear today that, provide us some specific feedback on, I think Rob noticed the city of Eugene did send us some specific timelines and say, hey, this is how reality looks in Eugene. How would this work? And so I think we're going to definitely be going through those things and making sure that we're providing an option that is responsive to those. And then based on the conversation today, we'll be making adjustments to the work program requirements as well.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And Samantha, did you have a question on the timeline?
I just have a general question about what for us to expect today upon giving feedback of all the topics. Is the idea that, because we're hearing, differences of opinions and stuff, I imagine we will throughout the rest of the time together, that the staff will go back, kind of think about what was said by the RAC members, and then kind of let us know where you guys are ultimately landing prior to the May commission meeting, and then like a final packet goes to the commissioners for May. I guess I'm just trying to know what to expect. Or are we gonna land on some things today?
It'd be great if we come to some consensus on some things like Sylvia said, but we don't expect it. We're going to be taking the input from the advisory committee and making recommendations to our commission based on that. In some cases, like here, we may give the commission options, say, we'll punt to the commission, but it's our job as staff to provide recommendations to the commission based on the input that we've heard. And we understand that not everyone's going to agree with every part of that. We're trying to, it's just impossible. So, but that's our goal. In terms of the products that we're going to see over the next few months, our commission packets go out 2 weeks ahead of the commission meeting. The commission meeting is the 19th of May. So the packets will go out May 5th. We're going to have something that comes out on May 5th at least. I can't commit because we have limited staff and limited time, that's less than a month from now, to having any interim products where we have responses to folks or something like that, but that's not to say that we won't do that. I'm just not going to commit to that today, if that makes sense. But certainly no later than May 5th, we will have draft rules that go out to the commission. We did commit to the commission that we would be very clear about in each rule what changes, and we'll do that in a way that's clear to folks, what changes that we made in between the March 17th draft that they reviewed at their last meeting and the upcoming draft. So it will be more than we've done before. We'll show where the changes are in between those two drafts.
Okay, and so there may be, though, options that are put forth to the commission on the 19th, as opposed to staff kind of mulling things over and then, putting forth a single recommendation based upon what we're talking about.
We've committed to do that as far as the timing piece goes. I don't think we've committed to do that for other substantive pieces of the rules. As this meeting goes on and it looks like that makes sense, it's possible we could do that. I don't necessarily want to, hand the commission, 20 different sets of options either. So we'll have to balance that, and we'll talk with our commissioners about that as what they would prefer as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. And there's also a question about when comments for the commission, for the May commission meeting need to be submitted in writing. And the deadline for that is going to be April 18th. Kevin, let me know if that's incorrect. That's what we had in our.
No.
Okay. So maybe, any written comments from today or additional comments from today's discussion, when would those be due to DLCD?
So I'm sorry, the question is for, maybe Kevin, you want to take this.
Sure. So, yeah. So I guess what we're asking these are RAC members today is for the 4 issues that we've outlined. If there are any follow-up thoughts that folks have, we'd like to get those by, I think it's Monday, April 8th. It is Monday, April 18th. So that gives you next weekend, this weekend, next weekend, to provide those additional comments. That gives us as staff time to kind of mull things over and prepare that next draft. The other question had to do with testimony for the written comments for the commission meeting. They will accept written testimony probably the day before I wouldn't wait too long because obviously they can't read it in real time. I will say best practice, what I would recommend is to submit that at least 2 weeks ahead of the commission meeting, because if it's, let's say, two weeks and 2 days, it's going to make it into that packet. And that will give commissioners time to review your written comments as they're reviewing the next draft. That said, you can submit stuff up to the day prior to the commission hearing, which I think is it's May 19th, I believe. I'm not sure if we've scheduled that hearing firmly. Kirsten, did you want to add to that?
No, you're exactly right, Kevin. And sorry to break in here, but this is important. Can't just not jump in here. So Kevin, there's probably a hybrid between what you just laid out, which is, awesome in a perfect world, which we're not in, that, folks' comments would come in concurrent with the commission's hard copy packet. The benefit of that, a little bit under the hood, the benefit of that, the 2-week packet, whatever's in that packet, they receive in hard copy as staff is available, and as the commission requested, we provide a supplemental packet also in hard copy, but it is not the norm since we've been on mandatory telework. Things are changing. We're so glad about that, but we've been, staff have been directed by our boss's boss to work at home as much as possible. So we've been doing supplemental packets only electronically. So what I would like to advise here, if I could, is that without talking to Esther and Ingrid and Elliot, the team that puts out those commission packets, they're complex, is that because our packets won't come out until, worst case scenario, quote unquote, would be May 5th, that folks kind of read that Reader's Digest that Bill just described, that really we're not expecting anybody to go through the rules again. That's extensive work you all have done, and we could not be more grateful, as Commissioner Lilac said. So on the 5th, we'll have our Reader's Digest. There'll be a new set of rules for adoption, or some options as well. If folks can get comments into us by, say, it would be by the 11th. That doesn't leave you a lot of time. So I'm going to say the 12th. Then perhaps we plan to produce a hard copy packet and get that out on the 13th. Commissioners would have it on the weekend, and they'd be able to review the supplemental comments the week of the 16th of May. So sorry to be so specific about that, but folks won't know what they're commenting on, Kevin, concurrent with the packet going out that first 2-week period. So we may just need to kind of consider doing a supplemental where people can roll in comments in the actual new May 5th draft packet. Thank you.
Thank you. And Emma, and maybe we'll throw those dates in the chat in just a second. I'll work with you on that. And Emma, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the clarification. I think it's really important to know how we can engage. The timelines are ridiculously quick. I mean, for the last version, it was reviewing the Secretary of State version, which we all know is not a format that is conducive to ease of review. And then the day that we were told comments were due was the same day that the draft rules for the commission were published. I know that staff are continuing to work through the comments, which I really appreciate. And I appreciate what Kirsten was saying about doing the Reader's Digest, like summarizing very clearly what has changed between the last version and this next version, because that will also help with ease of review. But it is concerning this disconnect between how the rules are being talked about and then the details of what's actually in the rules that we're taking seriously. They will be binding, and we will be held to the rules once they are adopted. So I really hope, and I'm looking to Commissioners Lilac and Warren in particular here today, to really think about what is needed to get these rules to a state that is ready for adoption, and acknowledging that we're getting the drafts at the same day that we're being asked to comment on them. And then staff are also trying to review hundreds and hundreds of pages and then convey to you how much time they need to implement the recommended changes. I know Springfield's comments that we submitted, a lot of them are cleanup and clarification items that, as I spoke to earlier, will really help with the efficiency of implementation. So I really hope that you will listen to us, give us enough time to look at, okay, how much has it changed? Because we think that some significant changes, more than just polishing the furniture, is needed. between where the rules are right now and adoption. And if that change hasn't happened by May, I would hope that you'd extend the time to get the work done, because we really want to see a good quality outcome. We want to see climate and equity needles moved. We need to make progress on these topics. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Emma. Okay, let's move into our next topic and looking at inclusion of the bicycle network standards in the rules. And so I think over here, we are heading back to Bill again to present a proposed path forward here and want to hear your reflections. So over to you, Bill.
Yeah, so thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, this is hopefully won't take quite as long. It's pretty brief. We actually don't even really have any questions here, but people have questions or have comments on this. Happy to hear from you. Our bicycle network standards, we do require, and our rules have required for a while now in the drafts, require local governments to plan for a connected network of bicycle facilities that's safe, low stress, direct, comfortable, and is designed for all ages and abilities. I think, we've heard a lot of comments from folks saying, okay, that's great, that's what we want, but is it specific enough to really tell local governments that we want the thing that we're looking for here? And there's one guide in particular. It's from NACDO. It's the National Association of City Transportation Officials. It's called the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, and it lays out basically, essentially, best practices for excellent bicycle facilities in the American context. And they use a lot of learning that's been happened in international context and brought it over to the United States. NACDO is a U.S. Organization, and they're focused on American cities. So it's really the state of the practice in this country in terms of really putting together great bicycle facilities. And frankly, it's a really good product, and we are excited about having that in our guidance, but we haven't made a specific connection to it in the rules, and I'll talk about that in a second. What we did do in this most recent draft is we did update our rules to define all ages and abilities, and we did use a lot of the guidance from NACDO to develop that definition, and so I think that was a step in the right direction. But at our last commission meeting, the commission did ask us to make a change there. So our existing draft does not refer to NACDO standards, and this gets a little legally, unfortunately. We can't say use the most recent version of the NACDO Urban Bikeway Design Guide in the rules, because that's what's called delegating the responsibility of the commission to another entity, and they legally can't do that. So they can say refer to the second edition of the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, which is the most recent one right now, because that's a finite product that they can look at and say this isn't going to change because of someone else's actions. The commission is referring just to this document, so that's the legal issue there. The problem is there's a third edition expected next year. So I think staff's concern was, geez, if we say, talk about the second edition and we know that it's getting a little long in the tooth and there's going to be better materials coming out next year, when will we have the opportunity to make that change? We don't know right now when we'll be able to revisit these rules. We've heard comments from people saying staff should recommend revisiting these rules in a couple of years. I personally agree with that. I think we should. I think that the context is, we have a small agency with a lot of different things going on, with a commission that's, a volunteer commission that has a lot of demands on their time. That's going to be a conversation that happens over the next few years between within the agency and with the commission. So I can't commit right now to saying that we're going to be able to revisit these rules in a certain time frame. But the commission decided at their last meeting that they would like to include NACDO in reference into the rules. And I think, the writing between the lines there would be that they expect that there will be an opportunity to at least update the rules to say, the third edition at some point in the near future once we have that third edition. So that's just kind of the background there. So we have been directed to do that. We do need to work with the Department of Transportation on the specific language around that. And we're going to set some time to work through. We sent some proposals over to them. We're going to work back and forth with them on that. The idea is that local governments will be able to use guidance from the Urban Bikeway Design Guide directly, or as part of helping to develop their own set of rules. So it'll be an option for them. They will need to meet the standards that would be consistent. They don't necessarily have to be inch for inch what NACDO has, but we expect that they'll be the same type of level that NACDO provides. And we also may include other standards. ODOT has their own standards for state highways. They've done a lot of work in the last few years and made some great strides there. So we will talk with them about this. I have not had this meeting yet with them, but we will talk with them about this, and we expect that there will be some other options as well as NACDO in there, on top of local governments being able to design their own standards as well. So that's all I have to say on that one. If folks have any questions or comments on that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I'll put something in the chat. So we're hearing that commission directed staff to include the Urban Bikeway Design Guide in the rules, kind of referencing it. And so staff is suggesting that jurisdictions be able to use guidance from those Urban Bikeway Design Guide as an option, or to develop their own custom plans or standards that result in outcomes that are consistent with what's in the NACDO standards. So just want to hear your reflections on that general proposal. And Samantha, is your hand still up from before or on this topic?
No, it's on this topic. This is Samantha Bear, Oregon Home Builders Association. One of the items that we flagged in our comments is the idea of comfortability being used as a term throughout the rules. It's for someone kind of a lay person, it feels pretty subjective. Does the NACDO design standards include a definition of comfortability, or does it just, I guess, is there an actual definition that jurisdictions can go look to, or does it just generally discuss the idea of comfortability? Or does ODOT have standards that could help inform that definition?
Yeah, I can't tell you if it, off the top of my head, if it defines comfortability. What it does do is it says, for these specific types of contexts, and it gets into a level of detail that the rules would not be able to get into. It talks about certain, speeds that are expected on facilities, certain types of facilities, what types of bike facilities are appropriate for those speeds, those volumes, those types of facilities. That means it is a comfortable facility. So it really puts, I think it really dials it in and gives it, much more specific. When you've got this type of place, this is what's comfortable. And so that, I think it does add some more specificity there for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Leanne?
Yeah, I really wanted to just express my gratitude to both commissioners and to DLCD staff for really moving these directions, or these rules in the right direction. As a bike advocate, I would be ecstatic if we had the second edition of NACDO, as like if all the jurisdictions followed that, it is more likely to get us there than to not have those embedded in the rules. And I really see that jurisdictions will have the flexibility to follow whatever that guidance that comes out in that third edition if they want to go above and beyond. So I just wanted to really show my support for that, and that I'm not particularly concerned about the potential delay in updating the reference to the third edition. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Leanne. Mary Kyle, and then Julie.
Mary Kyle McCurdy with 1000 Friends. Thanks. I echo what Leanne said, and I'll just note, you do elsewhere in the rules refer to a specific year of a specific external document, and not only in these rules, but in other rules that the commission has adopted. And you've also updated them as updated versions of those come through. It's just a matter of course. But I agree with Leanne to clearly make them as the current second edition as a safe harbor and be very clear about that, I think adds that clarity for local jurisdictions that want to know if we do this, we're good to go, but we can do some of our own stuff if we meet these basic standards. And to just be very clear about that, I think it's kind of a win-win. I am a little concerned about what sound to me like vague references to ODOT documents and standards for parts of this. It was in the memo that we got today, or for this meeting today, it said the use of ODOT documents may be considered. I don't know what that means. Or so are we going to see that if there is something coming in that's ODOT standards related to this, are we going to see those in sufficient amount of time to comment on them and review them? There's just a lack of transparency there that I'm very concerned about.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And it's not so much a lack of transparency, it's I really need to talk with the right people at ODOT to make sure that we're talking about the right terms, the right documents, because they threw a list of about 6 different things at me and I'm not sure which one is. So there's a thing called the Blueprint for Urban Design, which ODOT went through recently and is pretty good in terms, of what it's looking for on facilities within urban areas. And I think we've got a placeholder that just refers to that right now in our draft that we're talking about internally. The problem is it's not really a thing that's going to stick around. It's going to be a thing that gets rolled into another document, maybe the highway design manual. It's not clear to me. You start getting into ODOT engineer speak here, and it's that's the issue here. I just want to make sure that we're referencing the right thing that exists and that will continue to be something that we can refer to in a way that makes sense. And we're going to have something like that because the rules, just in our work with ODOT, we're going to need to make sure that we refer to something like that.
As long as it's clear to what ODOT documents, what you're referring to, how they're going to be used so that we can review those. Like I said, the statement of ODOT documents may be considered is just kind of open-ended to me. So
there must be a specific reference in the rules. And just like you said, we refer to specific documents all the time and we can do that. I'm not saying we can't do that. I think our hesitation was referring to a document that would be out of date pretty soon, not that we couldn't refer to a specific edition. We just need to talk with ODOT to figure out what's the specific document with ODOT that we need to refer to. We're going to look at that at DLCD to make sure it's the right thing. And, then everyone else will have the opportunity. It'll be public document
as long as we understand what it is and how it's being used.
It has to
be comment on it. Thank you.
No, DOJ won't let us just there's the ODOT document. In fact, we hashed this out with our attorney pretty well about because some of the ODOT staff, we talked about this before our last commission meeting, was suggesting a couple different things, and that there's ODOT documents that they this really gets into the weeds. The ODOT documents that they update that are their internal guidance from time to time, we would have to make a specific reference to one of those. If we have an ODOT rule, we can actually refer to the rule that gets updated every time now and then. But if it's less than a rule, if it's just guidance, even if it's pretty strong internal ODOT guidance, we can't do that. So we have to work that stuff through ODOT, which doesn't really operate the same way. And we just need to hash some of that stuff out, the details.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Julie and then Matt.
So this conversation, this topic brings up for me one of the things that I struggle with a little bit in these rules is the level of detail that's being anticipated or expected out of a transportation system plan. Because when we're talking, design guideline, design documents, design is typically a higher level of detail than we get at in a transportation system plan. But it sounds to me like that's the direction that this rulemaking is assuming. And maybe I'm wrong, but this is where I guess I'm concerned about implementation, the cost of implementation. So, as an example, I understand ODOT did applied their blueprint for urban design on a facility in McMinnville recently. They did sort of a conceptual design level planning project. And I know I asked for the budget on that, but I can't remember what it was, but it was not cheap. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so if we want to do that design level, higher design, still not design, but that design level conceptual thing, we're talking about like a State Street project like we did in Salem or the Commercial Vista. We're talking a lot more refined than we typically do at the TSP. So are these rules assuming that we're going to get to that higher level in the TSP in our first go around here? I know there is the provision that allows for refinement plans, but it says refinement plans must be completed within 5 years. And so part of me is thinking, well, you look at my city, and if you were to try to do refinement plans for maybe, I don't know, 8 quarters, 10 quarters, something like that, and each one of them cost maybe $1 million, and there's no way we could do it in 5 years. Maybe it's not quite $1 million, but it depends, you know. Anyway, those are my thoughts on this topic. I would hope that the rules would give the flexibility for us to apply design level, but not require that the plans be design level.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that's right. I think at the TSP level, before we've done any detailed refinement, we expect that you know, the plan will identify where the key bicycle network is. You know, generally speaking, where those corridors are, that it's connected. You know, maybe identify where the gaps are, things like that. I think those are the kinds of things that are right for that. Will it figure out, you know, how many feet wide should the bicycle lane buffer be at this spot? No, absolutely not. But, you know, we expect that the standards that are, you know, whether it's the city develops their own standards or they're, you know, they just borrow NACTO standards or what happens, that, you know, those will be consistently applied at every project that happens along. So, you know, different places have different types of projects, but at least those standards that that have been developed will be used as projects move forward. Does that make sense? And one other thing, we expect to get rid of that 5-year limit on the what was it, the refinement plan thing. We'll probably make that to be the target, the horizon year of the plan or something like that. It was too short.
Thank you for that. I totally agree. There is challenges when you say we're going to do, you know, this is going to be our key corridor, but we don't know exactly, you know, are we going to do a 2-way cycle track on one side of the street, or are we going to have separated cycle tracks on each side of the street? So then if a development comes along and we haven't done that refinement planning level detail, we can't require that, you know, one development to do their frontage of some unknown, undefined, you know, comfortable bicycle facility.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's gonna be yeah. Oh, Sylvia.
Oh, no, I'm just looking at the time a bit and noting that we have another couple of topics to get through today. So maybe just quick comments from the hands that are up, and if we can try to take a break around 10:30 and then move into our next 2 topics. So Matt, over to you, and then Damien.
Yeah, I have some of the same concerns that Julie has, but if this is incorporated as a safe harbor and it's meant as guidance, I think that's fine. We already refer to the urban bikeway design guide in our TSP as it is, but we do recognize that there are going to be circumstances where we have to do things a little bit differently. As long as we have that flexibility, then I think I'm fine. So I'll wait to see how this is actually written up, I guess.
Thanks, Matt. And Damien?
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to concur with the comments you've heard so far. I think I just need a little clarification if there will be another reference to an ODOT product in addition to the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, or if the Urban Bikeway Design Guide will be the first resource we turn to when we're looking at designing bicycle infrastructure.
Yeah, we still need to work through some of those details with ODOT, but my expectation is that they expect that there will be the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide or this other ODOT product, which we will define.
Thank you. Emma and Rob?
I think we have consensus on this item. So I appreciate my fellow RAC members. I echo Leanne's appreciation, Mary Kyle's comments about the safe harbor and, allowing this to be something that definitely works, but also allowing flexibility for other items. To Mary Kyle, your question, and also Damien's question around what would be referenced. So the blueprint for urban design was established. The Highway Design Manual 2022 version is currently being updated. Comments were being accepted until March 18th. I believe it would probably reference that design manual. The draft is currently available on the ODOT website, and part 900 is the bikeway design section. So I am really glad that DLCD and ODOT staff are talking, but I think the likely outcome of that is a reference to that section. For anyone who wants to look at it sooner, you might go there. And then I'm really glad to hear that the 5-year refinement plan requirement is going away. And so great. To the level of detail, I'm still confused as to why in the bicycle inventory work for the bicycle portion of transportation system planning. So subsection 1 of 605 says inventories must include information on width, type, and condition. And so if we're not getting to the level of detail in a TSP that requires even like specific width, let alone condition, I'm like, what does condition mean? Is that like surface pavement smoothness? Or if we could have an explanation, that would be great to know. Are we putting a lot of resources and collecting information that doesn't go anywhere? In which case, could we spend those resources maybe doing bike and pedestrian planning for our entire community instead of just the rings around the schools and their arterials and collectors? Because I'd rather serve our community needs than have a lot of wasted resource.
Sure. Yeah. As far as the inventories go, we understand that I think we're asking for a higher level of detail than maybe that's been there before. And we are working with ODOT. I don't know if Cody, you want to step in here, but we're working with ODOT on kind of a statewide contract to do a lot of that bicycle pedestrian inventory work for the affected jurisdictions across the state. So, I mean, basically, we would hand you that product. That's the idea. I don't know if Cody, if that's still on the table. I think that is.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, so we're working that up. That's you can find that in that link at the top of your chat for that draft implementation plan from Commission Packet.
Right. Thank you.
And so is there a condition answer, or do we know what condition means for the bike facility?
Yeah, good question. I think I'd want to sit down with maybe some of the ODOT folks and see what they think that would mean when they do that inventory work.
Okay, thank you. I think this is another example of how there's more work to be done on these rules. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Rob?
So I just want to clarify, if we have a street where there's no room for even a buffered bike lane, and we're building a lot of protected bike lanes in Eugene, but some of our major arterials, like we've already narrowed the travel lanes to 10 or 11 feet, widen the bike lanes as much as we can. Are we going to be required to put in NACDO standards on those streets? And just so you know, like we're developing parallel routes, but is there going to be a firm requirement that on a major arterial street that you have to meet NACDO standards when you're doing your TSP and doing your planning?
I would have to go back and look, but I believe we've modified the rules to be clear that there needs to be a connected bicycle network. That does not necessarily need to include every arterial. If you have a facility nearby that can meet those needs and access the destinations that place would access, then you might be okay without having to put the excellent facilities there.
Okay. And I mean, and every protected bike lane we build, we're pretty much removing a travel lane or parking. So we're doing a lot of that. But on a 30,000 vehicle per day major arterial with just two lanes of traffic in each way, we can't take a traffic lane. I mean, we could take a traffic lane out, but it would be, we'd probably end up with a new city council or something like that. So I mean, it would be extreme. It wouldn't be tenable. So I appreciate that, and I would encourage you to go back, just double check that bill. I appreciate the emphasis on the network. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we want to be clear that, we've heard the feedback that different facilities are used for different things, and you don't necessarily need to have everything on every facility. if you can achieve the outcomes through using other parallel facilities or other places and other parts of the network. So, our focus is on getting an excellent bicycle and pedestrian networks. And, is it going to be necessarily an excellent bicycle facility right next to a very busy street? Probably not. So that's maybe not the right place for it.
Thank you. All right, thanks everyone. And we are running a bit over time, so let's go ahead and take a break and resume at 10:40 if that works for staff. And then we'll be talking about requirements for strategies for affordable housing and anti-displacement measures at that time. So see you all at 10:40. Thank you.
Which finished discussion about using the urban bikeway design guide by NACTO? Okay. Part of the rules.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I know that was a short break. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Young in a second to walk through a proposal for including requirements for affordable housing and anti-displacement measures in climate-friendly areas. Again, just looking at direction from the commission and how DLCD is seeking to respond to that direction. And today we're just looking for your reflections on DLCD's proposed approach. So I will hand it over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Sylvia. Kevin Young, I'm a planner with DLCD, he, him pronouns. Yeah, so the first item to talk, I'll be talking about today is affordable housing and anti-displacement measures in climate-friendly areas. Next slide, please. So the commission, in their first hearing on the 31st, gave us direction to require local governments to adopt housing production strategies that will promote the development of affordable housing and mitigate displacement of underserved populations in climate-friendly areas, along with the designation of these areas. That was the direction. Next slide. So our challenge is how do we operationalize that? And I'll be stepping through that. But first of all, what are housing production strategies? We've been talking about this all along, but just to be clear, housing production strategies are maintained. Well, so there's a list of housing production strategies that are maintained by the department. Currently, it's a 110 item list of tools, actions, and policies that local governments can use to boost housing production. Those policies are divided into several categories, including zoning and code changes, reducing regulatory requirements or obstacles, financial incentives, financial resources, tax exemption and abatement, land acquisition, lease and partnerships, and other custom options. So the context of this was House Bill 2003, which established a requirement for cities, population over 10,000, to update their housing needs analyses on a regular schedule. So outside the Portland metropolitan region, the requirement is every 8 years. Within the metro region, it's every 6 years. And then following that update, which essentially identifies the local government's housing needs over the future planning period. How much housing are we going to need to accommodate our current and anticipated future population? 1 year following that, local governments are to produce housing production strategy reports, which are actually identifying actions that the local government will take to help to boost that needed housing production. And probably the big focus of that will be on the types of housing that are not being produced by the market. So we know that market rate housing is getting produced. It may not be being produced at the rate that even that demand calls for, but we certainly know that other housing for folks who aren't making median area income is not being produced by the market. So that there will be a big focus in that work on affordable housing needs. The housing production strategy list has also incorporated the anti-displacement and gentrification toolkit. And so if you look at that list, and there's a link to it in the packet materials, so if anybody wants to look at it, they'll see that there's a color-coded system that evaluates the effectiveness of certain strategies based on identified neighborhood types, which is the methodology that's laid out in the anti-displacement and gentrification toolkit. So again, the department is in collaboration with Oregon Housing and Community Services, planning to put together a mapping application that will be usable statewide, that local governments can use to identify the necessary information about their different areas within their jurisdiction. Okay, next slide, please. So what are some examples of housing production strategies? So in terms of measures to promote affordable housing, these are just a few examples. Allowing for height bonuses for affordable housing. So you might allow taller buildings to be built, if affordable housing is included in that, in those buildings. Construction excise taxes, that's a tool that local governments can use to basically identify a source of funding to support future affordable housing development. Reducing or exempting systems development charges, or SDCs, for affordable housing development is another tool that happens. And also multiple unit property tax exemption is another strategy that helps to incentivize the development of affordable multifamily units. In terms of anti-displacement measures, here's a few examples. Of course, eviction prevention programs are very important. We've certainly seen that with the pandemic. The state has been very active in supporting keeping people from being evicted from their housing. Conversion of distressed commercial developments is another tool that is used. And a recent example is actually Project Turnkey. The legislature provided funding to purchase distressed motels and to use those for emergency housing in the last, I think that was done in the last, maybe not the last, just the most recent legislative session, but the year before. Preserving low-cost existing rental housing is a very important strategy. So making sure that that existing housing continues to be affordable for residents. And then land banking is another strategy that can be used to mitigate for displacement that might otherwise occur. Next slide, please. So in terms of how staff propose to implement the direction from the commission, first of all, as we're thinking about drafting rule language to do this, the question of when would local governments do this work? Our suggestion is that we require adoption of those strategies concurrent with the zoning and comprehensive plan amendments that are done for climate-friendly areas. So that would be in the second year following the study period. As the zoning and comp plan amendments are done, also the local government is identifying the tools that they are planning to use to support affordable housing and to mitigate for displacement. We're not really thinking about a required number of strategies, but just looking for local governments to provide a good faith effort to identify the tools that make sense for them and to implement as many as they can. With the affordable housing strategies, we're looking for findings associated with comp plan amendments. So basically that is the tool that we would look to for identifying what those affordable housing strategies are. And then item 4 there is on the anti-displacement side, an additional finding that's very important is showing that there's been some consideration of neighborhood typology in relation to measures adopted. Because if you look at the anti-displacement toolkit, not every strategy is effective for every neighborhood that may be vulnerable to displacement or may be currently experiencing displacement. So there is some judgment required for local governments to look at the tools available and figure out, okay, for this particular area, if we're zoning it to be a climate-friendly area, what's the right tool to mitigate for displacement that might occur? And I think that may be my last slide on this item. Yeah, so at this point, I think we're just open for any comments or questions about the proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And do you mind just maybe copy and pasting that proposal into the chat? I think it's just helpful to have the words in front of us as we talk here. But yeah, again, so it's sounding like the commission provided direction that when local governments design their climate-friendly areas, they should also make sure they're adopting strategies against displacement and to allow for affordable housing. So DLCD has this proposal on how to incorporate that into the rules and looking for your reflections on whether this proposal makes sense. And if it doesn't, what would you propose be different? So see some hands up. Let's go to Jeremy and then Michael.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. Question one, I mean, I'm interested in hearing the feedback from local governments, but I appreciate the efforts to try to get the housing production strategies and anti-displacement measures implemented to sort of do the best we can with affordability within the framework that's been provided here. But I guess I'd ask the question about the other side of that accountability for affordability on the state's side. As I think staff is aware and the commission members are aware, we have concerns that the rules themselves will create negative impacts on housing affordability. And the question is it taken as for granted that the rules will do what they will do, but the cities are to do within the framework of those rules what they can to best deal with that? Or is there going to be a feedback mechanism for the state itself to adjust the rules if they have negative impacts on affordability? And I guess I would throw in there, along with that question, is there going to be an effort to assess that before all of these rules are implemented and all that work is done? Because we do think that there are some aspects of these rules that could drive up housing costs, maybe in an unintended way. So thank you.
And thanks, Jeremy. And Michael?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I wasn't sure whether or not anyone from DLCD wanted to respond first to Jeremy's comment, but assuming that's not the case right now, at least, I have a lot of concerns about this, and I emailed DLCD staff yesterday a series of points. I don't want to repeat all of those here, but I do want to flag several things. One is that cities and developers chronically underestimate the demand for accessible housing and the need for accessible housing for people with disabilities. And I would posit that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that cities don't know how much accessible housing stock there is in their cities. And therefore, it makes it impossible to use as a baseline for planning. So unless we have an insight on where we are in terms of the demand for accessible housing and how much housing stock we have that is accessible, it makes it impossible to project forward. So I think as a first step, we need to understand to get a picture of the lay of the land in terms of accessibility and housing. If there isn't accessible housing, you are going to have and continue to have displacement. And one of the things that I've noticed from the anti-displacement guide is that my view is that it is insufficient in terms of acknowledging the real effect of displacement as it pertains to people with disabilities of all races. And so that is something that I also think we need to tackle. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Michael. I don't mean to not respond to comments that have been submitted. I want to make sure that we hear from everyone today. So I'll just say briefly, Jeremy, in response to your issues with affordability, we've talked about this a lot. You know, I know it seems like one of the key considerations is we're likely to preclude single-family detached homes from climate-friendly areas. However, we are looking at this as providing a lot of other housing options for folks who don't necessarily want to live in or can't afford single-family detached homes. And so in terms of affordability, no, climate-friendly areas are not going to work for everybody, but there are a lot of people who will want to live here. So that's all I'll say on that. Michael, in terms of your issues, I think you raised some really, really good points. We've talked about the issues with ADA and our inability to require housing for persons with disabilities above and beyond those standards, but we're looking for tools to incentivize that level of development. And so, you know, in all of the comments today, what would be super helpful is if you have specific suggestions for tools or things that we may be overlooking, or a strategy that might be utilized, that would be most helpful. In terms of the data on accessible units, I think you're right. And we've heard that from many local governments, that we don't have a baseline of how many accessible units there are in our potential climate friendly areas. You know, local governments are going to have to move forward with the best available information. But what we are hoping to do as we roll forward is to establish that baseline as new housing is developed. And we know that a lot of subsidized housing does include requirements for housing for persons with disabilities. So there are some tools and there is some data available to inform this question, but it is not a perfect system. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sylvia, can I just be real quick? I'm sorry.
Sure. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, because I want to yield to all the hands up here. The just sort of looping back, Kevin went deep on kind of Jeremy's questions, knowing the conversations that they have had, and appreciating the concerns of Jeremy and his members, his realtor members, but not assuming that Jeremy's concerns are limited to folks, you know, single family homes, Jeremy, because you didn't say that in your comment. So that, but you're talking about housing affordability and whether or not, you know, what the feedback mechanism is. I would love to just pop in a concurrent 1 hour discussion on this because it is so provocative and so necessary. But yes, we have to monitor the implementation. There's no question we can't. We would all be having just wasted everyone's 2 years of their life to have attempted this and not monitor what the implementation looks like. So let's just kind of, you know, get back to RAC members and commission publicly on that, because it falls back to kind of our related programming on housing and housing production strategies, and even the evolving policy discussions around the regional housing needs analysis, Jeremy, that I know you're intimately involved in as well. So we just need like even more time to talk about that. Whether or not we'll be able to monitor that before these rules and the timelines go into effect, just say candidly, I don't think so at this time. That, you know, push for urgency. I think everyone on this call can acknowledge that this team collectively is evolving the edge of planning with respect to housing affordability and assessing gentrification displacement. I'm not even aware of any other jurisdictions tackling this. So I think we do need to carefully walk this as a beta test altogether and be carefully monitoring it. But with the urgency of the rules, we're just not able to kind of do the pre-work we would want with the climate just isn't affording that to us. And I just wanted to, for everyone else on Michael's comments, just wanted to make sure that when Michael's using accessible housing, folks know that that's accessible to, I think, Michael, that it's accessible to people with disabilities, because sometimes these terms around affordable, accessible, and attainable housing are used interchangeably. And so I think that Michael was speaking to specifically accessible housing for people with living with disabilities. I think that's it. I mentioned the regional housing needs analysis work. I know this is sort of a provocative little chad hanging there, but there is a major body of work going on right now, directed by the legislature, to look at better ways to capture how we identify underprotection, and that would include and should include underprotection for people living with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Mary Kyle and then Sarah, since we haven't heard from you, and then we'll keep going through the hands. Yeah, Mary Kyle.
Thank you, Mary Kyle McCurdy with 1000 Friends. I want to thank the commission for directing the staff, and the staff for then, you know, carrying forward with this to put a little bit more oomph into the use of the housing production strategies and any displacement measures in these rules. I think what the staff has proposed is appropriate, not a specific number or list of things, but instead to make findings that what is already underway or is planned to be adopted will address these issues of affordability and displacement. I want to take a step back, and I feel like there's a lot of conversations that are being kind of dumped into this conversation that's about affordable housing and anti-displacement in CFAs. And the very nature of designating CFAs and directing, focusing transit, walkability, and bikeability investments, we know from all of our past experience, is likely to result in some unintended unaffordability and displacement in these areas. And yet we know we have to increase transit and walkability and diversity of housing in order to address climate change and make more livable communities for a variety of reasons. And so we have a commitment in these rules to addressing that we care about affordability and anti-displacement. So this is just marrying these tools of anti-displacement and affordability into the CFAs to make sure that we are really serious about using them. And if we don't use them, we will have the affordability issues that Jeremy was talking about, and we will have displacement of all sorts of people that others have raised. So it's just critical. I think this is just about making sure that we're all doing as good a job as we can in these CFAs as we invest in them as we really need to and should. So if you look at the housing production strategies, about half of them have been flagged as having a direct beneficial impact on anti-displacement, in addition to having a direct beneficial impact on affordability and just overall housing production. And most of them are about reducing barriers and increasing the possibility of affordability, like provide density bonuses, whether it's height or FAR, et cetera. That doesn't mean that the housing will be produced or that will be affordable. Well, it will be affordable if it's produced with the bonus, but it's getting out of the way and letting things happen. So I think it's really critical that there is this requirement for findings, which I think highlights more the need for the robust public engagement at this place, not necessarily in developing a work program. If that still stays in here, I agree that's kind of an artificial time. But here, this is where people are really going to care about at the community level about what kind of affordable housing or anti-displacement strategies should their particular community be looking at adopting for CFAs. So again, if we care about affordability and anti-displacement, those are just increased reasons for really requiring cities to make findings about how they are or planning to utilize some of these tools. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Kyle.
Oh, and I did want to mention, some have mentioned home ownership issues. We know that about 40% of Oregonians rent, so we clearly have to make, and we don't have enough rentals, so we clearly have to make rentals available. But there will be I think there will be home ownership opportunities available in CFAs as well, particularly with legislation that the legislature recently passed, allowing fee simple ownership of duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, a variety of other things. So I just think those are creative ideas that we can come up with. So thanks.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, well, I could echo other comments already made, including Mary Kyle's just now. But I do want to, when looking at the staff proposal, I find it unclear between 1 and 2. So number 1 says local governments required to adopt the affordable housing anti-displacement strategies concurrent with zoning of climate-friendly areas. But number 2 says no required number. And so that to me is just unclear. It would seem from number 1, it is requiring at least 1. I just find that, what does that mean to require something, but then say no required number, only good faith effort? So it would seem like maybe number 1 isn't true. And I think that really matters, actually, too, that we not do lip service. When my experience, being present at the council meeting and engaging with what was presented to the council was, it was a really emotional experience, I have to say. I have a bunch of privilege now. I'm a law professor. I can't claim to not have a bunch of privilege at this point, but I grew up in, wasn't known at the time, but it was lived, an environmental justice neighborhood in Portland that is still an environmental justice neighborhood. I grew up in Coley and along Killingsworth. And, when people drive into Portland still to this day, when they drive in that Columbia Boulevard, Killingsworth route, and I don't mean to pick on Portland, but because I know Portland's doing a lot of work, Portland is such a great example. Portland's published, cities published their racist history materials, done a ton of incredible work, I would say good faith effort, right? And beyond. And yet at the same time, when people drive into Portland via that route, they're like, is this the Portland I read about? This innovative land use, city, etc. And, and some great things are happening in that Cully neighborhood, but still the air is unbreathable, and so I just think we brought together this RAC, and this really diverse RAC, the most diverse probably in DLCD's history and quite possibly the state's history. And we spent, a lot of time, 7 or 8 drafts on equity outcomes, right? But I haven't seen those equity outcomes recently. And I know when I look through them, they include like bottom line, accountability and enforceability. And so when I was, participating in the last meeting, and I didn't realize how much kind of stored emotion I had around these equity issues. I knew I cared a lot about them, but I didn't realize how visceral it was going to feel to say, oh, are we really going to go forward with rules that don't have enforceability and accountability around equity? And the kind of betrayal that represents, right? Bringing together this really diverse group, spending all this time on equity outcomes, and then kind of getting to this technical, this period of time where the documents to prepare for meetings were hundreds and hundreds of pages long, and things became so technical that I think it was challenging to continue to engage as just a public participant. And I don't mean to suggest in any way that was purposeful, a purposeful form of kind of creating a disengagement, because I know personally how many people are committed on an individual level to these issues, but it's still, even without that intent to be, to create a betrayal, which I don't believe existed, it can still be a betrayal. And the problem is that in land use and planning, that's pretty much all that historically marginalized communities have ever experienced from land use and planning, right? For decades and decades. And I do a ton of my research on the history with respect to justice issues of land use and planning. And, we started zoning in the United States, and particularly along the West Coast, to exclude. That was the point. And not just to exclude, right? And our House Bill 2001 is making huge strides in that area regarding exclusion to, from neighborhoods. But the other side of that, which has always been there too, right, is the not just exclusion, but then the sequestration of historically marginalized communities in areas that are less safe and less ability and to amass capital and just so many problems, schooling, all of that. And Oregon's made a lot of great strides. But just for me, we are labeling, this is labeled the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. So to get to a point where we say we don't have the time to do equitable now, and don't hear me wrong, urgency, that my other thing I focus all my time on is climate. And the urgency is real. We have to move forward within our time frame, but we have to find a way to actually have accountability and enforceability around equity. And we absolutely, as an issue of kind of trust and goodwill, we can't have anything in there that's lip service. We have to remove it. And I say that with all the kind of respect that I can muster, because I know the people working on this and I know where their hearts are. But we've had good intentioned failures so many times. We have to make sure this isn't one of them.
Thank you, Sarah.
I know. I talked long.
This is really helpful, and I'm hearing the frustration about not seeing enforceability and accountability reflected in these rules when equity is such a key component of the process. And I would encourage that if you have any specific proposals for how to indicate greater enforcement or accountability in this particular topic, that you bring that forward. And it maybe not here, but in comment after
I
today.
will.
If you
I'll
could-
do it in writing. And I just want to just end with one sentence or two sentences. And that is, if we don't have enforceability and accountability in these roles, I think that having brought together a diverse group creates more harm than good, because it dangles out there the possibility of such essential change and then takes it away. So the DLCD brought together this incredibly diverse RAC. So we have to make sure that the promise of that diverse RAC gets acted upon.
Sylvia, excuse me, I think it's just really important. Like, one of the team members puts the crosswalk on the equity lens in the chat. The good professor had noted that she hadn't seen the equitable outcomes in a while, and those actually have driven the writing of the rules. So Sarah, I hope that it'll be comforting for you to see this crosswalk document. I know there's just too many documents, but our commission asked for, and we provided a crosswalk of how the equitable outcome statements you reference have driven the rules, and where the implementation and hopefully the accountability and the monitoring will occur through that. So please do look for that if you could, and then let's chat again. Thank you.
I absolutely will. Thank you.
If I could, there's a couple of tools that are built in here that aren't really explicit in terms of monitoring and potential enforcement. So first of all is the post-acknowledgement plan amendment review process, which the department will engage in. And that's why the findings are important, because staff will review those. And if we have concerns, of course, our first course of action is to contact local governments and kind of work towards a more positive solution. So that's one tool. And there is potential to, appeal and all that through that process. But the other tool that I think is important to highlight is the housing production strategy work as well, which will be kind of continuous and iterative. And I think we are all hoping on the housing team to learn from that experience, to find tools that are working for local governments and to support local government work that effectively promotes affordable housing and mitigates for displacement.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. So I know we have a number of hands up. We still have another topic and it's already 11:12. So I might just encourage folks to bring your comments to DLCD in writing, if that's okay, on the affordable housing and anti-displacement standards piece, and so that we can just at least present the next topic and people are aware of that. So appreciate the hands, but I apologize, we're running low on time.
Sylvia, I just want to flag, I think this is hands down the most important issue we could all be talking about. And I know we have a time limit, and I know we have a lot more to get through, but I will say, in the vein of what was all just said, it doesn't feel great when we're skipping out on talking about equity in this really serious issue. We need to be carving out the time to work through this.
I appreciate that. And I'll look to staff if you'd like to continue this discussion or at least present the next topic here.
That's a good question. I think we have time for a few more comments, questions. Let's go ahead and continue.
So go ahead, Samantha.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. I will be putting it in writing because I definitely want to let the local governments have their time to speak on this issue. I will just flag on the idea of affordability. I'm really appreciative of the commission directing the department to make this more of a requirement. I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. I don't feel like this goes far enough. And I think there's other options that we could be utilizing to make sure that we are mitigating impacts. The regional housing needs analysis work is showing intense need for housing at all income levels, not just below the 80%, not just the subsidized. And we're greatly concerned about how some of the density requirements, as well as some of the land use requirements, both inside CFAs and outside CFAs, will preclude important housing that jurisdictions are, their needs analysis is going to show that they need it. And I guess I'll just say, I understand that we want to reduce VMT and we have these targets that we want to hit around density, but I don't think it has to be at the expense of important forms of housing that our communities need. And I don't think we need to be precluding any form of housing choice or housing type, which the density requirements will do. It will preclude single family detached, and it will preclude certain forms of middle housing that we're working really hard to achieve in some jurisdictions. And I don't, really understand why we would say no to certain projects. Like if you have a motivated developer who wants to bring in a middle housing product, but it's not 25 units per acre, it's 15 or 20 units per acre, are we really going to be saying no to those types of projects because it's not good enough, when that would be a huge improvement on density in some of the communities that we're seeing? It feels like, in a way, we're allowing perfection to be the enemy of good. And I think there are going to be inequitable outcomes. So something I would like the commission to consider is, if you have land use regulations or minimum density requirements that may preclude certain forms of housing, if that is a housing that is needed under HB 2003, or if we can have some other findings that would be a needed project, that they would allow certainly like a variance or something to allow that project to go through, even if it doesn't meet the prescriptive density requirements. I think that's another way forward here, where you could make huge improvement in density while still not precluding projects that are going to happen, because we just have to face the reality that development is stagnant in a lot of areas and we're not seeing the build out that we want to see. So let's not throw any more wrenches in front of that when we have motivated developers and we have projects that are going to pencil. And I'm happy to provide that in writing and to continue talking about that with staff and the commission outside of this.
Thank you, Samantha. And so Emma, Damien, Matt, if you have quick comments you want to provide on this, or in writing, up to you, but I'll just turn to each of you in turn. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. On the specific question, in the city of Springfield, we use 60% for a number of our programs, 60% AMI. And so I'm wondering if local governments could decide what level of AMI to use to better align with our local strategies and policies. Really like to see that. I really appreciate what Sarah was saying, and I think that is critical for these rules. We need to get these rules right. I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to effectively provide input that will actually result in good quality rules that produce the climate and equitable outcomes that we all set out to do through this process. On the one hand, rules are written in the draft right now that prohibit van pools, accessible public transportation such as RideSource from being able to pick up and drop off people between the street and a building, and significantly increasing the cost associated with development on commercial and mixed use sites to reconfigure their properties. And at the same time, I'm not seeing the rules address other inequities, such as right now, sidewalks in most jurisdictions are the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, whereas public dollars provide for the roadway surface itself. So if we really want to encourage walking, then I don't know, I gave that input back in RAC meeting, 3 or 4, and I'm wondering where the responses to these great ideas that have been brought forward by RAC members have gone, and why there are certain rules that would actually move us backward, such as the 660 division or section 12 03303B that I was referencing about not allowing for pickup and drop off of people, other loading zone things. I know the freight stakeholders have kind of raised these issues as well. So I'm just confused. I want this to be a good outcome. I really appreciate what Sarah was saying.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Emma. Damien.
All right, thank you. I'll be quick because I have a couple of questions regarding implementation. Regarding number 1 on page 2 of 2 regarding adopting affordable housing and anti-displacement strategies, my question really is on anti-displacement strategies that are not going to be necessarily based in a code or a comp plan. How do we document if we're going to be, say, creating a new program? And if that's the case, are we doing something where we're providing a council approved resolution with a budget that goes with it so we can convince the decision maker, the reviewer, that we've adopted an anti-displacement strategy if that's what we end up doing. Second question on number 2 regarding good faith effort. I don't know if that's going to be an established legal principle, or if we're looking at more of a matter of a goal to factual base where we can convince a neutral decision body that, yep, we could also see how you came to that conclusion, and we can see that you've made a good faith effort. So those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
I'll just say very briefly, Damien, I think you have hit on some very important questions. It's going to be difficult to define precisely what you're talking about. This whole realm of housing production strategies includes a lot of things that aren't zone changes, that aren't, those kinds of land use decisions that planners are used to doing. So, what's the burden of proof? What's a good faith effort? I think that we will be poised to provide guidance to local governments as we roll this out, and then we will be learning over time together about what that looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, I have some of the same concerns that Samantha and Emma raised on the issue of the 80% affordability. I would encourage you to be careful of creating unintended consequences with affordability. We have a lot of programs that we can use, at least at the city of Medford and in other entitlement jurisdictions, for housing that is affordable to households at 60% and below. So we have CDBG, as well as state lift programs, 9% low-income housing tax credits, 4% low-income housing tax credits, and a whole variety of tax abatement programs specifically targeted at that area. So there's a lot of, relatively speaking, opportunity to do things for affordable housing at those rates. It's the 80 to 120 that is the most challenging. It's the margin is very, very narrow, and we don't have enough of that housing. So, Kevin, I don't know what this is going to look like when you write it up, but I'm really curious to see that, because that's an area that we're really focused on, that middle moderate income housing. I have some of the same concerns about the good faith effort, what that standard means for the communities who are going to have to get this done by 2024, right? Because they're going to have to adopt these programs, or the programs that they're going to use are going to be in process to some degree by the time this all gets done in 2024. It is not a simple process to adopt a construction excise tax, to adopt multiple unit property tax exemptions across an entire city. There are fiscal consequences for the local jurisdictions, which I will note, this is why it's really important to partner with our state partners, because these are going to be costs that are borne by the local jurisdictions when we talk about property tax abatements and other forms of economic incentives for affordable housing. So I would definitely consider that in how we make good faith efforts or demonstrate good faith effort in reaching these outcomes within a pretty short time frame. So.
Thank you, Matt. Kevin?
Just briefly, so I just want to make it clear, I'm hearing loud and clear about the 60% and below AMI. So our intention here is not that anything that supports that level of housing affordability is out of step with what we're talking about. Everything that's 80% or below would qualify as affordable housing. We definitely don't want to preclude these other tools that are used, and would support local governments in that realm. In terms of 80 to 120, yeah, that's a little more challenging. 80 and 120% of AMI, area median income. I will note that inclusionary zoning is one tool that statutorily is basically targeted at that population. So that's a tool that local governments can utilize to support development of housing in that range. that's all I have at this point. So should we just move on to our last
Yeah,
topic?
I think so. For the next topic, on a smaller block length standard, I think maybe Kevin, if you just want to frame the issue, and then we'll look for RAC member comments by email, since we're running low on time, and then kind of move straight into next steps.
Happy to do that. You can go ahead and move to the next slide, Bill. Thank you. All right, so our last topic is fairly focused on a specific issue. So block lengths within climate-friendly area was a topic of some discussion at the commission meeting. And one of the issues raised was, well, it may be that a local government will be redeveloping a large area within an existing developed climate-friendly area, or may wish to designate a climate-friendly area in an area that has yet to be developed. And so in that case, it would make more sense to establish a smaller maximum allowed block length, and that would be 350 feet or less for larger scale redevelopment. And so next slide, please. This is essentially our proposal as staff as to how to do that. So what we're suggesting is that we establish a maximum block length of 350 feet that would apply for development or redevelopment of at least 5.5 acres or more in a climate-friendly area. And so the reason we arrived at 5.5 acres is we did the math on, okay, what are a couple of blocks? Say you have a 350-foot square block. What's the size of that? Two of those blocks essentially is about 5.5 acres. To give you a sense of the scale of that development site. The other proposal here is just to reference, just a note that we have existing language in the transportation planning rule that regards exceptions to street and access way requirements. We had written that into the prior draft, and this is just a reference to existing language versus inventing a new definition out of whole cloth. Next slide, please. And this is just sort of an analysis of the implications of a large site block length standard. So looking at large blocks, and this is assuming square blocks, not, many blocks aren't square, but if they are, a 350 foot by 350 foot block is 2.8 acres. So the scale of redevelopment that would trigger this new block length standard would be 2 or 3 blocks. And as the blocks get larger, as you can see, you get to 500 by 500, and redevelopment of an entire block would basically necessitate that new block be established at a 350 foot level. So I know it's complex. I'm happy I don't know if people are confused by that, maybe I could take a minute to answer any clarifying questions, but just looking for feedback on that proposal. And I would most appreciate if you don't think this is the right approach, please give me specific suggestion for how it might be amended to work better.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And just with our 2 minutes left, maybe Kevin, over to you for next steps, and then to Commissioner Warren for closing remarks, and then any other DLCD staff for closing remarks.
All right. Thank you very much. Today, it's been a full and free discussion. I appreciate very much everyone's insights today, and I'll look forward to getting the written comments. Again, a reminder that if you wish to provide additional input on the things we've talked about today, we request that you submit that to us by Monday, April 18th. That'd be next Monday. We won't be sending out a survey, so just send us an email and this is the issue, and here's my proposal, or here's my input. I also want to note for those who have questions about how the rules will be implemented, we have a question and answer session today at 2 p.m. I think everybody was extended that invite, and so feel free to drop in if you have any questions there. And then just a reminder of the, I think we put testimony in the chat about input, and the next hearing is May 19 or 20. I'm not sure that that's been scheduled yet, but
it'll be the 19th, Kevin, I do believe. unless
Oh, it's
something.
the 19th? Very good.
Yeah, unless something changed, maybe Sarah could weigh in, but I do believe it's been noticed for the 19th.
Okay, fantastic. So,
It is for the 19th, yes.
and that's it. I think, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And Commissioner Warren?
Thank you, Kevin and Sylvia, and thank all the RAC members for all your continued engagement and especially your thoughtful engagement today. It's really been helpful for me to help shape my understanding of the rules. I do think these rules are going to move us in the right direction with climate and equity. I also think that we have more work to do, and I'm very thankful for staff for all of their intense efforts that are going on behind the scenes and probably every waking moment of their lives right now. This has definitely been a different rulemaking effort than we've done in the past. And so we are really learning about how to intentionally bring new voices to the table. And I think this has been a great learning process for us and will help us to continually shape the process in the future. So thank you for being a part of that and really being the voice for those who have not been heard before. I think you all have done an amazing job of being representative of those groups. And once again, I just appreciate all of you so much. This has been a great process, and I've never met most of you in person, but I feel like I somewhat know you because of this process, and I look forward to hopefully one day getting to shake your hands. And also just want to encourage you to give us more and more feedback. Please keep it coming, and invite you personally to the meeting on May 19th. It looks like we're probably going to be having it in person in Salem. From my understanding, staff, please correct me if I'm wrong. So maybe that'll be an opportunity for us all to get to actually greet each other in person at some point. And then just a last minute heartfelt thank you again. This has really been a meaningful process. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, staff and all RAC members for your great engagement. Appreciate it. This was our final RAC meeting. I know it's not your final chance to provide your input and engage, but it's been a pleasure being a part of this group for the past year and a half. So thanks everyone for everything. All right.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.